for journalist and biographer Julia Langdon. Welcome to you, Julia. And joining us via Zoom, Anna Soubry, the former Conservative and Change UK MP. Hi, Anna. And Sir Roger Gale, the Conservative MP for Thanet North. Now, the number to call if you have questions for them, 0345 6060 973. And, of course, you can watch us on Global Player on the LBC website at lbc.co.uk or the LBC Facebook and YouTube channels.
This is a new media takeover.
I know, it's fantastic, isn't it?
Big fusion.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Welcome to you all. Let's go to our first question. It's from Priyanka in Oxford. Priyanka, what's your question, please?
We are in the perfect storm of stressed public services and a new COVID variant. Is Boris Johnson capable of leading us through this?
Roger Gale, I don't know how you voted in the votes yesterday, but would you like to give a view on whether Boris Johnson is capable of leading us through this crisis?
Well, I said to the Prime Minister in the tea room as we were about to vote last night, this is one of the rare occasions when I'm actually going to agree with you, because I think he's done the right thing. I was one of those, you will recall, Iain, who probably 3 times in the course of last year, in March and then in September and then in November, said that the Prime Minister was too slow to take action. So I can't reasonably criticise him for then getting ahead of the game and taking what I think will prove to be proportionate and appropriate action. Nobody likes locking down, of course. Nobody likes having to regulate. And I voted, like everybody else probably, who supported it with a heavy heart. But I think it's the right thing to do. And if within 2 or 3 weeks it is shown that the Omicron version of the virus is much milder and less vicious than was anticipated or anybody thought was likely to be the case, then we can unlock very quickly. But I think it was the right thing to do, yeah.
Do you think it's gone far enough, though? Because you look at the figures out today and you look at some of the projections and the fact that there's yet another press conference today and you just wonder what might be coming down the road.
Well, look, Iain, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. The Prime Minister had a hard ride yesterday. As I said, as you know, I'm not a paid-up member of his fan club, but nevertheless, he had a hard ride yesterday getting the message across. The figures, to some extent, have vindicated part of his argument today, but only time will tell whether or not this is having an impact on the health service, which is what this is all about, and as a consequence, of course, an impact upon life and death, or whether it's been an overreaction. But we have to wait and see, I think.
Now, Anna Soubry, I think we can describe you as also not a paid-up member of the Boris Johnson fan club, but I saw you nodding along with Roger there. You think that Boris Johnson did the right thing yesterday?
Oh, yes. I mean, the right thing was to follow the advice from the scientists. And, I agree with everything that Roger's just said. But unlike Roger, I'm going to answer the question. I say that with a smile, Roger, because you avoided it, and I don't blame you.
Actually forgot it, Anna.
Well, I'm in a lucky position because I can say what I want. No, you can't. The problem is with Johnson now is that there's this big question of trust, and he can't be trusted. And, in the real world, the number of people who just say, well, I will abide by the rules and I will do all this stuff because people like Chris Whitty say it, and frankly, people like Roger Gale and other sensible people in Parliament say it, but not because of Boris Johnson, because the trust has now been broken. Because time and again, he's let himself down, he's let his country down, he's let his party down because he tells lies. And this latest business about the party is a really good example. And the really stupidly awful thing about it is not just that there clearly were a series of parties. If they'd just been honest about it and say, look, it was the end of the parliamentary term, the last Friday before Christmas, and these guys have been working really hard, so on and so forth, got some beers and got some wine and got some pizzas in, shouldn't have done it, it was wrong, we're really sorry, we wouldn't even be talking about it now. but it's the cover-up. Roger, and no doubt others know, it's always the cover-up that is the worst side of it.
David Starkey, let's remind people of the question. Is Boris Johnson capable of leading us through this?
Probably not. But then I don't really think Boris Johnson has been leading anyway. I mean, what has happened from the beginning of this crisis is that he has ceded leadership to a scientific cabal. And unlike Anne, I think this is profoundly dangerous. I don't think we should be run by sage, leaking reports, leaking scare stories. I don't think that we should be sacrificing an entire economy for the second, third or fourth time. Do you know how many deaths there were yesterday from or with COVID? 165. Do you know how many deaths there usually are in a day?
I'm sure you'll tell us.
About 1,000.
No, that's
in other words,
true.
It is. There are normally there between 7 and 10,000. Said 7 and 10,000 deaths a week. We have a population of 65 million, and
true.
this is the problem. We have been, in historic terms, if I may speak briefly, not for history, but as a historian, this entire epidemic is tiny in historical terms, even compared with Spanish flu, even compared with ordinary flu. In a bad flu year, we get 450 deaths a day from flu. We don't close the country down for it. This has been a case of extreme panic because we could. And I will leave it now, because I've said this several times before. We got a Chinese virus. The risk is that we will finish up with a Chinese society, because, as Anne said, people, even people as intelligent as she is, this mantra, we trust the scientists.
But if you can't,
experts,
if you can't trust the scientists, who can you trust?
I'm sorry.
Look at the
That
facts.
is not the... No, please. This is not... The point is, there is no single science. Scientists disagree. What we have at the moment is a series of... It is absolutely true. We have a series of juju calculations by people like Neil Ferguson, who historically have been wrong about everything. They were wrong about BSE. They were wrong about foot and mouth. They've been wrong about the scale of this. The only reason we have the vulnerability on this is because of the staggering mismanagement of the NHS and the fact it has relapsed into being a national COVID service. Sorry, we need to call things by proper names. We've never had a serious discussion. Our politicians deliberately have avoided serious discussion on the balance between life and death, on the balance between the economy and marginal protection of life and so on. There's a refusal. We mouth mantras like trust the scientists or let's all get excited about a party. And this is an infinitely trivial reaction to a profoundly serious issue.
And I'm going to come back to you in a second, but first of all, Julia Langdon.
Well, back to the question, is Boris Johnson a capable man to lead? And my answer is no, he is not. And he has been proved not to be. But what is alarming, apart from COVID itself, and I disagree with David Starkey because I do trust the scientists, but I'm sure we'll come back to that in a minute. What is alarming is that we learned last night that at least 100 Conservative members of the House of Commons don't trust the Prime Minister or think he's capable of leading or is leading correctly at the moment. And I think that is very, very...
Well, to be fair, that wasn't the question that they were voting on. They were voting on whether they believed in COVID passports or face masks. They weren't voting on whether they trusted the Prime Minister.
They were not voting on whether they trusted the Prime Minister, but the implication of the vote is that they do not have the trust in the Prime Minister. I think that for a rebellion of that nature to take place in such serious circumstances is really terribly dangerous, even for democracy, possibly.
It is, in effect, Iain, a vote of no confidence. If half your backbenchers resist a major decision of policy, which is then carried through, as Keir Starmer, whom you know I do not like, as he said, you have a Prime Minister who has absolutely lost authority. When the opposition carry a major piece of government policy, it is or should be finished. It won't be because there ain't no alternative.
And we can't have a vote of no confidence because of the
absurd absurd legislation.
Yes,
Anna Soubry, you had your head in your hands while David was speaking. Do you just want to take up one or two of the points that he was making that you vehemently disagree with?
Let's talk about the facts of this. COVID is a particular type. But David, what you weren't doing was understanding the nature of the disease and why we're doing the things that we're doing. If people are really ill with COVID, which I'm sure you agree that there are people who are so seriously ill when they get COVID that they have to go to hospital. And when they go to hospital, they go on to wards, and some of them, too many, end up in the intensive care unit. And normally when you have somebody in intensive care, they've either had a horrible accident, a very serious accident, or they've had the sort of surgery that requires them to go into intensive care, but for a very short period of time, a matter of literally a couple of days, and then sometimes longer, obviously, with a serious accident, but not the length that we're seeing with COVID patients. So people are in intensive care for weeks, in some cases for months. And that is one of the major problems for the NHS, because it's, if you like, gluing up the whole system. And the nature of this particular disease is that it's a respiratory disease. There are, at the moment, there's not much you can do apart from taking paracetamol, though there are treatments, as we know. But if you get it and you either have underlying health conditions or you're just damn unlucky, then it's a serious threat to people's health. That's why we've done this. Why else would we do it? It's all about protecting our NHS.
You've answered your own question. It's another mantra. All you do is repeat slogans. I am tired of government by slogans. I want government by reason. The NHS has known the situation, Anna. Please, the NHS has known the situation you describe now for well over 12 months. It has done nothing about it.
What do you mean it's done nothing about?
It's done nothing about it has done nothing. It said it diverted vast sums of money into useless Nightingale hospitals. It did not focus on the issue of intensive care, which Anna has raised. Well, in other words, there's been a total failure of strategy.
What was one of the reasons that, I mean, if you're right, was one of the reasons is that the steady decline in hospital beds that has gone on really since 1980 under successive governments, where we now have under 100,000 hospital beds. Oh, you were health minister, Anna Soubry, so you know about this.
Ian, you're absolutely right. The problem with the Nightingale hospitals, which actually was very much a government initiative, and nobody had the courage to stand up and say to the government, it's all well and good having Nightingale hospitals. You haven't got the staff. That's why we haven't got the staff. Now look,
hooray, they agree.
And I also agree that Boris Johnson's unfit to be a prime minister. But there's a really important thing that I think we should really be talking about now. This COVID is not just going to go away. That's one of the deeply depressing things about this new variant. And in that event, what we have to do is, rather like we did with and I'm old enough to remember some of these isolation hospitals where you put people with COVID, where you treat long COVID, and where you have to staff them and almost separate them from the NHS, where we need to be now getting it back to where it was, because we know there are literally hundreds of thousands of people who should be having certain treatments and diagnoses for cancers and other really serious illnesses. And that means we've got to have a huge amount of money and a huge national effort when it comes to vaccinations, when it comes to training people. And we need to start doing that work now, because sadly it's not going away.
Three of you seem to agree that Boris Johnson is not capable of leading us through this. Roger Gale, what are your colleagues telling you about their views of Boris Johnson and what he needs to do to regain the initiative?
I'll have a bite at that cherry in a moment, if I may, but I just want to come back, because David Starkey has made a very good living out of being deliberately contentious over a very long period of time.
Surely not.
I don't begrudge him that living, but he is talking absolute drivel. And the graveyards and the crematorium are full of people who have, over the last 18 months, died of a terrible disease. And it is an insult, frankly, to the memory of all of those people who suffered from this, to try to take the line that he is taking now. I'm sorry, it is offensive. Now, to answer the other question that you asked.
It's not true either.
You have your view, Professor Starkey. I have mine, and I don't agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to take the next question, the one that you actually asked and the one that I forgot to answer. About 100 Conservatives voted against the government last night. Of those, there's a hardcore of probably 30 former European Reform Group metamorphosed into COVID recovery group MPs who are opposed to absolutely everything, as far as I can see. And they're led by people who I respect, but again, whose opinions I just don't share. On top of that, you've then got a significant number of my colleagues, and this is where it gets dangerous for the Prime Minister, of people who basically took the opportunity to give the Prime Minister a kicking, knowing that they could do so without defeating the government, but sending a very clear message to Downing Street that they have been very and deeply unhappy with the conduct of the man in Downing Street over the last couple of weeks at least, if not longer. And they want things to change. Whether things will change or not is a very moot point, but we shall find out in due course. My personal view is that tomorrow, the North Shropshire by-election might prove a tipping point. The other possibilities are that either Lord Geidt or the Cabinet Secretary may produce reports that indicate that the Prime Minister has misled the House of Commons from the dispatch box. And if that is so, then that is a hanging offence and he would have to go. But those juries are out.
So you reckon there's three things which could provoke your colleagues, maybe you, to send letters to Sir Graham Brady calling for a vote of confidence in the Prime Minister?
Well, I've already said very publicly and very clearly that if the Prime Minister were to have been shown to have misled the House and were not to honourably volunteer to go, then Sir Graham would have to go and have a few words with him. Yeah.
David, I'm leading constitutional historian, I mean, that would be quite something, wouldn't it? If the Prime Minister is found to have misled the House, do you think he would have to go?
Undoubtedly. The position, as Roger has described it, is correct, and rightly so. But equally, let's just moderate this a little bit. Johnson does have one enormous historic fact to his credit. He did solve the Brexit crisis for the Tory party and for the country. In other words, he's a rather odd Prime Minister, and there have been a few of them, your book shows it, who are creatures of a single moment, a single crisis, and then the circumstances which brought them to power, which to an extent they thrived in, but obviously made profound enemies by so doing, the circumstances change, the skills that they had become redundant or actually turn against them. And I think we may be at that tipping point moment.
Julia Langdon, you've seen Prime Ministers come and go over the years. Do you sense that Roger is right here, that we are about to experience, or Boris Johnson is about to experience a tipping point?
I think tomorrow's by-election will be very interesting indeed. But I think things have already started to change, and I think that change happened last week when you yourself wrote somewhere, Iain, that you went into your local fish and chip shop and people were making jokes about what had happened and Partygate, as I've been calling it. I had the experience of a member of my family who's never been known to express a political view in her life suddenly said to me when we were discussing Christmas, and she said, well, you could always call it a business meeting. And I was very, very shaken by her expressing...
I'm just reeling from this idea that you, as a political nerd and geek like me, have a daughter who hasn't expressed a political opinion in her life.
It wasn't my daughter.
I thought you said your daughter.
No, it was a cousin, a member of my family. It was a cousin. No, my daughter is extremely political.
I was going to say. Well,
anyway, the British public last week got wise to what Boris Johnson has been and what has been going on. And
you say that, but over the years, opposition politicians have always thought that, and then he goes and wins another election.
No, but I characterise it as Mrs. Do as you would be done by. I mean, they look at what was happening last Christmas and remember, as I do myself and an 8-pound rooster, who I named Rodney, and ended up as R.I.P. Rodney and Pie.
Cannibalism. Christmas
pie.
Cannibalism.
Right. Interesting though this discussion has been, I've just seen the time and I've got to go to a break. It's 8:20.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:22. David Starkey, Sir Roger Gale, Anna Soubry and Julia Langdon with me answering your questions. And the next one is from Jane in Twickenham. Hello, Jane.
Hello, how are you?
Hi. Very well, thank you. What would you like to say?
Yeah. What is the government going to do for landlords at the moment?
In terms of what? What would you like them to do?
The rent. Really scary at the moment, because it's just going to go down.
Are you talking about commercial landlords?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, for shops and sort of hospitality.
Yeah. We're landlords, and we also we're in hospitality too. So half and half, and it's really scary out there now. We've lost loads of bookings.
Julia Langdon, this is an issue which obviously came up a lot at the beginning of the pandemic when people said, well, what is going to be done for our particular sector? And I think landlords in particular felt that they were hit because obviously a lot of their tenants couldn't pay the rent, but nobody is going to feel sorry for landlords. They're not sort of one of the groups of people in society that people generally have a lot of sympathy for. Do you think that if there are further restrictions introduced, perish the thought there should be another lockdown, do you think the government should step in and help landlords?
I think the government is going to have to answer questions quite shortly about what it's going to do to help a great deal of the economy. Jane in Twickenham didn't mean pub landlords, but pub landlords have got an issue, but so is the High Street. The High Street is in very bad trouble at the moment, and that is partly because of rent. I am not an expert in any way about estate management, but I think the government is going to have to, I hope they're beavering away in the Treasury on what is going to happen. There were people already talking about furloughing. I mean, people's economies, personal, domestic economies, are going to be very badly hit just by what we're doing now. I'm not talking about any further restriction on our activity, but just you can see already the difference in the streets. I mean, I drove here from West London and I was through in a flash. Nobody going to the cinema, nobody going to town, nothing happening. And my high road is shuttered shops.
Anna Soubry, do you get the feeling that there are lots of businesses, maybe lots of landlords, who just about got through the last lockdowns intact? I mean, obviously some will have gone by the wayside, but I think most of them managed to get through, but another one would send them over the edge. And in that circumstance, is it the government's job then to step in and prop people up, particularly landlords, as Jane wants to know?
Well, it will have to be. I mean, I think it was Roger who said that, at the moment, we just don't know what this new variant is going to do. We don't know whether or not, although we have seen this big rise in the number of infections, whether it's going then to lead to the rise in the number of admissions to hospital, which will then put this huge, even more pressure on the NHS. So we just don't know at the moment. But if things start to go badly again, then we're going to have to go back to helping people, because it's the right thing to do when government is everyday lives and business.
I think Anna's line is giving up on us, so let's quickly go to David. In a sense, this goes to core political and economic beliefs, doesn't it? Do you believe that it is the role of government in a time of national emergency to step in and rescue businesses?
But it also goes back to what I think, very unfairly denounced as merely being a contrarian for saying, to begin with, we've not had this serious debate about what is the balance between an economy and, in the broad terms of epidemics, a relatively minor epidemic. It's the first time. I mean, epidemics traditionally bring about economic disaster, right? Notoriously. But this is the first time that the economic disaster has been caused not by the epidemic, but by the measures we've taken, the social measures, the Chinese measures, the lockdown that we've taken. The reason we've got this call is precisely the issues that I was describing at the beginning. And a decision that we simply prioritise one thing, which is health. Because again, Anna was making the usual noises. The NHS needs more money. It is about to take 45% of gross government expenditure. Every other department of state is being squeezed ruthlessly. We've just heard the cries. Now we're hearing a cry from a landlord. We've heard the cry from the Foreign Office, the catastrophe of military procurement, which is partly inefficiency, but it's also grossly cut budgets. We've not had a proper public decision. I'm not trying to be offensive, Sir Roger. I am simply saying, you as a politician, you, Anna, as an ex-politician, you, Julia, as a journalist, me and you as commentators, should be furthering this serious public debate. Getting excited about parties is not the issue. And you know what? We are on the edge of major economic catastrophe. China is sitting there licking its chops as the West is committing economic suicide. Look at America, the precipitation of inflation.
That's happening here, that's happening all over the world, isn't it?
Well, it's in the West because of the measures.
I don't know what David's alternatives are.
Sorry, but we've not had a debate. You can't know the alternatives unless you have a debate. And you can't have a debate when elderly and senior backbench Conservative MPs denounce you as being offensive and spitting on people's memories. I'm not spitting on their memory. I have seen people die. I rescued my own partner and I saw him die and I held his hand. I know it. I found him effectively dead. Please, I understand death. What I'm trying to say is, confronted by this appalling series of choices, we have not had a debate. The government has deliberately shut down debate. There's been the mouthing of slogans. And all we've done is throw money rather indiscriminately. As you know, the furlough scheme led to gigantic fraud. It has also produced zombie companies. We go on and on with a complete failure to have serious politics.
Roger Gale. Anna, hold on. Roger Gale, please.
I'd like to try and get back to Jane's question, which I seem to recall was about commercial property and about the hospitality business. Once again, we've diverted in a very big way indeed. I mean, we have actually come through this in much better economic shape than I and I think many others thought that we would. And while mistakes have been made, and I don't dispute that for a moment, and yes, there has been fraud, the fact of the matter is that the package that Rishi Sunak put together has preserved jobs to the point where when we thought we were going to, post-furlough, come out with massive job losses once the cliff edge came, actually, we've got a job surplus and we've got far too many jobs that we can't fill, which is a quite extraordinary situation to be in. And there are genuinely more people employed now than there were before the pandemic. And that is a bizarre situation to find ourselves in. But that said, I think it's an absolute fact. And the high street is never going to be the same again.
Yeah.
And those of us that I do represent a seaside town, dependent very heavily indeed upon the hospitality and the tourist industry, know only too well, Jane, exactly how hard those, particularly the restaurants and the pubs and the clubs, have been hit. And of course, where they're hit, landlords are hit as well, which is the thrust of your question. We can't bail out everybody to every extent. And I think the jury is out on this particular wave of this new strain of the pandemic. I hope very much that within 2 or 3 weeks, we shall find that we've overreacted and we can take the brakes off again and start to get back to normal. If that isn't the case, then government certainly is going to have to look at some further support for those industries that are bearing the biggest hit. But one of the reasons... hang on, just 1 second. I'll finish, but just 1 second. One of the reasons that I and others supported the measures taken last night was because we believe, I hope rightly, that by making people feel safe when they go out to dinner, to the theatre, to a football match, to a pop concert, they will be able to do so. So far from cancelling, right, they will actually attend because they'll know that everybody else in the same room has either been tested or vaccinated, and that while nothing is perfect, they will be as safe as they can be. So that ought to encourage people to take advantage of the hospitality season rather than to neglect it.
OK, well, as Julia said, I hope that the Treasury civil servants are beavering away on this as we speak. More of your questions in a moment. It's 8:33. Andy Ivey has the news headlines.
England's chief medical officer has warned all the things we know about the Omicron variant of COVID are bad. Professor Chris Whitty has been speaking as daily cases of coronavirus in the UK hit a new high of 78,000. A woman who beat her partner's 16-month-old daughter to death in West Yorkshire last year has been told she'll spend at least 25 years behind bars. Savannah Brockhill has been handed a life sentence, while Star Hobson's mother, Frankie Smith, has been jailed for 8 years. Thames Valley Police say it's highly unlikely any further survivors will be found following a fire in a block of flats in Reading. One person died and a 31-year-old man has been arrested on suspicion of arson and murder. LBC weather. Tonight there'll be clear spells across northeast Wales, northern, central and eastern England, where some frost and fog is possible. Tomorrow it'll be mostly dry but rather cloudy across many areas. Some sunny spells mainly in the northeast and a high of 11 degrees.
This is LBC. responsibly. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:36 is the time on LBC. You're listening to or watching Cross Question. With me is Sir Roger Gale, Conservative MP, Anna Soubry, former Conservative and Change UK MP, Julia Langdon, political journalist and biographer, and David Starkey, historian and YouTuber. Now, you've just launched a new YouTube channel, so you can be legitimately described as a YouTuber.
A YouTuber.
I always think YouTubers are 19 years old, but what's the aim of the channel and what do you do?
Me talking about history, me doing what effectively amount to combinations of lectures and tutorials on a very wide range of topics, Tudor history. I'm doing a series on the history of Parliament, which I'm very interested in. I'm doing a series on statues, because my argument is when you know why a statue is put up, it's usually the best reason why it shouldn't be taken down. And on buildings, on topics that people want me to talk about. And I'm really enjoying it because, I enjoyed television and I enjoyed making big history programs and so on. But this is different. YouTube done very simply, just with a single webcam and a microphone. There's an extraordinary sense of intimacy.
Yeah.
A directness of conversation. It's very interesting looking at the below-line comments and seeing how people respond. And we're obviously setting up debate within the channel as well. I'm sure we will move into things like Zoom and so on. Again, very much in the same thing. I did a Spiked yesterday, which was also multi-Zoomed. Okay. So and they become extended conversations.
And it's called David Starkey Talks.
Called David Starkey Talks, which he's never done before, of course.
No, obviously not, no.
Totally novel.
Right, let's go to our next question. It's our old friend Sean in Concert. Hello, Sean.
Hello, happy Christmas to you all.
And you.
A very serious question, this, right? Isn't it about time that this country got itself back together again and started giving out stiffer sentences for drink drivers?
This is on the back of Katie Price, the artist formerly known as Jordan, being sentenced for drink driving today. She got 16-week 16 week suspended jail sentence, and then I think 100 hours of community service. And this was her, I think I'm right in saying, 5th driving offence. We are going to be talking about this more after 9 o'clock on the programme. David Starkey, let's start with you. If it's your 5th driving offence, if this was me, I'm sure that I wouldn't get off with a suspended sentence. Do you think that Sean's got a point? We need harsher sentences for drink driving?
As somebody whose partner was arrested for drink driving, we need to know what the causes of it are. I think it varies wildly from somebody who is in a deeply chronic condition like this woman to an occasional indulgence at a party or whatever. As often is the case, and here I'm not going to sound the usual, offensive shock jock, we need an understanding of the individual. Mere talking about heavy sentences gets us nowhere. Drinking heavily is a disease. Alcoholism is a disease. It is only marginally susceptible to imprisonment and all the rest of it. What we should have, of course, is a very simple rule that there should, I think, with drunken driving, be one strike and you are out as far as your traffic licence is concerned.
She has been banned for 2 years.
I would make it longer. With a record like that, there seems to be very little case for restoring a driving licence. I mean, so in other words, I would go for harshness in the removal of the ability to drive, and on the other hand, a profound susceptibility to the individual and the individual's condition. And what struck me with the case of the person I was describing, when it actually was before the magistrate, none of that was really addressed. There was simply a declaration, oh, how scandalous, you're a young man in a nice suit, you can pay a big fine. There was no serious attention to the individual. So I think, isn't it nice, Anna, we're actually nodding at each other, that there we are, that there is this need. No, it's not. It's a recognition we can both speak reason and both speak evidence.
Right.
So there's need of the double approach.
Let Julia speak some reason now.
I don't think there is any reason why anybody should get behind a wheel when they've had a drink. They're going to kill someone. They might kill someone. And I think that there should be zero tolerance. And that it doesn't matter what the reason is that they, whether they have a social problem or whether their marriage is broken up or whatever. People should be banned from driving. But
she's been banned 5 times before. And you think, well, surely if you've been banned 5 times before, OK, she's now got a 2-year ban, which will have been longer than the previous one.
Should be taken away for a very great deal longer.
To my mind, she's got off really lightly.
Yes, me too.
I would agree.
Me too. I don't think she should be allowed to drive again.
And Anna is desperate to come in.
I am, because as you know, Iain, I'm now back at the criminal bar. So quickly say, though, that this is
as a lawyer, not an offender.
Months. Yeah. And I defend as well. But anyway, so this is the maximum sentence for drink driving is 6 months, and it is actually a very serious offence. And Roger will explain about I know also that if you're a judge and you were to be convicted of drink driving, then you would not be allowed to sit any longer as a judge. I mean, it's just taken very seriously, and rightly so. But with the Katie Price case, as I understood it, so she's got 16 weeks as a suspended prison sentence, and be under no doubt, for a woman like her to have gone to prison would be a very serious punishment. And the way I read it was that the magistrate that actually sentenced almost complained that she'd had her hands tied because the previous magistrate, no doubt when Price admitted her guilt, pleaded guilty, seemed to have said, you're not going to go to prison. And in which event, that magistrate had her hands tied. But I rather got the impression that she was saying that if she hadn't had her hands tied in that way, then she would have sent her to prison immediately. And of course, if Katie Price commits any criminal offence, she's breached that suspended sentence and she will go to prison. Or it's very unlikely she wouldn't go to prison.
There's an awful degree of consensus breaking out. I hesitate to say this, but I actually agree with David Starkey on this.
It's allowed.
Look, there are going to be people out there listening who will say, "Oh, ridiculous! Lock them up, throw away the key." Sean, I think is that concert in County Durham, Sean?
It is.
I suspect there might be a different attitude further north.
What do you mean by that?
Alcohol. I mean, quite simply, that I think there's a sort of a metro attitude, rather like there's a metro attitude to cocaine.
No, there isn't.
It's not shared by the whole of the rest of the country, actually.
I think what Roger's talking about
not to drink driving. No.
I think there used to be the attitude that could you get away with it? That the law was there to be got round. Certainly, my late father was of that view. If you took the back roads, you could go to the party and have as much whiskey as you liked.
And I think that was, or maybe still is in some areas, certainly an attitude in very rural areas. I know.
Well, that I think is what Sir Roger is saying about.
I thought he was basically saying that all Scottish people were lushes.
No. I think he's saying
no.
Concept is not in Scotland.
No, he said a bit further north.
No, he meant concept is a bit further north than London.
Right, Roger, defend yourself.
County Durham is not in Scotland.
No, but you said a bit further north.
But second, I think there is a metropolitan attitude to this in a way that there is also a metropolitan attitude to cocaine that is not shared by perhaps people with more common sense who have a greater sense of right and wrong. But that said, and this is where I agree with David Starkey, alcoholism is a disease. I have worked with a number of alcoholics, and I'm not talking about the other 659 in the House of Commons. I'm talking about real, and to be facetious, I'm talking about real people. And it is a disease. And I think Anna's right in saying that if Katie Price were to have gone to prison, it would probably have destroyed her completely, if she hasn't already destroyed herself. And we have to understand, on the one hand, I think that people need treatment. But on the other hand, we have a clear duty, and magistrates have a clear duty to protect the public. So my guess is that by giving this lady a suspended sentence, which, again, it now really is one strike and you're in, not out, ought to send a fairly salutary message. But I would say to Katie Price and anybody else, once you've recognised that you've got a problem, if you've got a problem, then for heaven's sake, don't wait. Turn to your friends, tell your friends, and get treated. Because that's the real solution to this, and we don't, frankly, do enough of it.
I interviewed Katie Price once for an hour, which I have to tell you I was not looking forward to. I even read her autobiography in advance of it. She's one of the most intelligent people that I've ever interviewed.
Yeah, she's smart.
Absolutely fascinating woman. And I then watched her Fly on the Wall series on UK Living, which you shall we say you don't get that impression from that series, but she's quite a complex personality. And as you said, David, it's very easy to just sort of say, oh, we'll throw the book at her. But that's where sometimes the legal system doesn't really do what it's supposed to do, because it doesn't really delve into the individual person. But maybe that's just not possible. Sean, thank you for a really good question. I knew you'd have a comment on that, Anna, which is partly why I said it. We'll come to another question in just a moment. It's 8:47.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Text 84850.
8:49. David Starkey, Sir Roger Gale, Anna Soubry and Julia Langdon answering your questions. Here's a text question from Elizabeth in Newcastle. Now that Omicron is taking hold, shouldn't we be seriously considering compulsory vaccination? Anna Soubry.
No, I don't think you can do that. I think that would be a step too far. I think there has been a failure in the vaccination programme, in the sense that I think the government took the foot off the pedal on making sure that those people who hadn't got jabbed got every opportunity and every encouragement. So if you take my home city of Nottingham, only just over 60% of people have had both jabs. So 40% haven't had both jabs, and there's still quite a big percentage who haven't had any jabs at all. So the government's done the right thing on the booster programme, but it's also got to be encouraging people. I think if we start saying what are you going to do? You're going to fine people if they don't get vaccinated. Nightmare. No, not a good idea.
Just walk up to people in the street and jab them in case they haven't been jabbed. I mean, the logistics of this, I just don't see how you would do it.
Yeah, just not going to happen.
Austria and Germany are doing it. Roger Gale.
No, I don't agree. I think it would not work. It's not the way we behave. It shouldn't be compulsory. There are incentives. It does help to do certain things if you have been vaccinated, but I think people have a right not to be vaccinated. What they don't have a right to do is then inflict the effects of their non-vaccination on other people. And that's maybe a subtle difference.
What incentives do you think you could give people to get vaccinated, Julia? I mean, in America, I think some states have held lotteries. So if you can prove that you've been vaccinated, you enter a lottery and you could win $1 million. I mean, should we be looking at that sort of thing to try and up the vaccination rate?
I suppose it might help. I was rather alarmed to read in the Times this morning that 1/3 of Londoners had not been vaccinated, which I found quite shocking. And
I think that includes children as well.
Oh, does it?
Yeah.
But it's still a lot of London, and I think there are people who have all sorts of reasons why they don't go for it. Partly cultural. Yes, you might well be right. I mean, I think you can win American citizenship on the lottery too. So people. No, I have, again, I've got a very large family. I have a relative in the States who won their American citizenship.
Goodness me.
So it sounds like a brilliant idea.
David?
Well, again, it's really important to get the history here. We used to have compulsory vaccination for smallpox. The Act of 1853 specified
I printed that off the other day.
That all children had to be compulsorily vaccinated because that's how we got rid of it. Forgive me a piece of autobiography. I was born too late for the Salt vaccine and I got polio. I feel very strongly that whereas lockdown was a nonsense, vaccination is the proper science. And we need to look at the situation of compulsory vaccination. You can just see the shot, can't you? Old lady held down screaming while syringe. In other words, it will be just like force feeding of suffragettes in the First World War. But what we need is surely a set of rules that specify which jobs absolutely require vaccination. Or I would have thought all public-facing roles. In other words, you have a choice between employment and vaccination. I have absolutely no problem of vaccine passports. If you want to go into a public place, you will be vaccinated. We again need to stop pussyfooting around this notion of cultural differences. These need to be frankly addressed and frankly argued. And so I would take a much harder line on this than most, because here I think there really is the science. And again, Roger mentioned this point too. Until very recently, we had an extraordinary thing. Anna did also. We had a network of isolation hospitals. We had unbelievably draconian powers for medical officers of health. The problem is with antibiotics and the cutbacks of the 1960s, we lost control of this. We assumed there wouldn't be another epidemic, that all the major infectious diseases of the 19th century were solved by medicine. And then, of course, this thing comes up and bites us.
So are you in favour of compulsory vaccination?
I'm saying, and not that I would actually force a syringe into people's arms, but I think there's a reason that everybody who has got a public-facing role, in other words, I would make it compulsory. In other words, the legislation would say if you didn't have vaccination, you would be profoundly limited in what you could do. I'm sorry, I do believe in a two-tier society in this sense. You see. Again, I'm normally fairly a libertarian, but you can't.
Well, that's what I was thinking.
But you can't argue. You can't argue with a virus. A virus does not understand a syllogism. Liberty is properly reserved for areas over which human beings actually have control.
See, this is where we need John Stuart Mill in the studio, isn't it?
And I think John Stuart Mill would probably agree with me, because the great campaigners for vaccination in the 19th century were rational liberals.
Well, on that bombshell, I'm just going to read out this text from Cindy, going back to the Katie Price question. Facts are important. Katie cares for a disabled son who lives independently but needs his mum most of the time. Step into her shoes. She needs help, not judgments. Right, next question, final question. So I'm going to ask you all to be quite brief on this one. June is in Basildon. Is asking people to donate money really the most we can do to help Afghanistan? Roger.
It's not the only thing we can do, but if we can help the Médecins Sans Frontières and the Red Cross and others to get the aid in, because they've got the care troops, the charity troops on the ground, where most of the rest of us haven't. That is a good way of doing it. But it's not the only thing we can do. There has to be diplomacy as well.
Julia?
We could restore overseas aid to the previous level that has just been cut by this government, and we could restore the International Department
Department for International Development.
International Development. Thank you very much. And that would be a very good way to help.
David?
We could perhaps hope and pray that the Afghans learn to govern themselves better. Until that happens, nothing we do makes any difference at all.
Unlikely under the Taliban, it has to be said.
I fear it is. I'm sorry, there are situations which are simply unsolvable. We have spent endless treasure, endless time, lots of lives, and we have failed miserably. I'm afraid what is likely to happen is the Chinese will intervene brutally, effectively, and managerially. That's what will happen.
Anna Soubry?
Well, I think we all have an absolute responsibility, however much we despise the Taliban, to make sure that as few children die in Afghanistan from starvation as they seem set to do. And that's why we should give. But I'm afraid we have treated the Afghan people abominably in the manner of our withdrawal, and we have let them down, and we should not have, the Americans should not have withdrawn, and we should have done considerably more to persuade them not to withdraw. And I think it's a terrible betrayal of the Afghan people and all those who gave their lives in that long battle with them.
We're going to be speaking to David Miliband, the former Foreign Secretary, and who currently runs International Rescue, later about the situation in Afghanistan, so stay tuned for that. Right, our fun text for the end, which I know all our panellists always look forward to. This is from Jack in Stockport. Those staying in quarantine hotels will be allowed to leave and their money refunded. What hotel experience would you most like your money refunded for? Now, I can think of one. David, you must be the nightmare hotel guest, demanding perfection.
No,
from
absolutely,
everyone.
absolutely not. I think the only time I wanted my money refunded was when I stayed in an extremely expensive gay hotel in where was it, Palm Springs, and didn't actually get sex.
Roger Gale.
I
thought it was an outrage.
I have a young constituent.
I've stayed in that same hotel, and nor did I.
Yeah, there we are.
I have a young constituent. I don't stay in those kind of hotels.
Oh, we're so surprised.
All right, I'll stop there. That's it. Fine. I don't need my money back. I don't use that kind of establishment.
Anna Soubry.
I was just thinking of the joys as a straight woman staying in a gay hotel, especially if you two were there, would be absolutely marvellous. Mind you, sorry, Roger as well, that'd be great. I did actually
There'd be a supplement, Hannah, there'd be a supplement.
I stay in a hotel when I was considerably younger, and it was so rough that there was actually, this was a certain seaside place on the northwest coast of England, and it was so rough. There was actually graffiti in the beds. I couldn't possibly comment. There was graffiti on the bedside cabinet.
Party conferences are
graffiti.
Fun,
It was a party conference. Can you believe it?
Did it say Tory's out? Did it say Tory's out?
Certainly not. Certainly not. It said, Dave loves Sharon or something. I don't know, whatever. But it was
Dave
graffiti.
loves Dave.
Yeah, it was not in those days. Wasn't allowed.
I once was responsible for the evacuation of the entire. Is it the Grand Hotel in Bournemouth?
Yes.
The posh one?
No, in Bournemouth. No, that's Brighton.
No. What's the Grand Hotel
the
in
Bath,
Bournemouth?
The Royal Bath.
Highcliffe.
No, the Royal Bath. I got the entire clientele of the Royal Bath evacuated. I mean, because I was setting up my computer behind the bed in the bedroom at the time, and it set off some alarm, and the whole hotel was I was very glad not to be asked to pay for what that cost them.
Yeah, well, I can imagine. Well, my story was also from Blackpool, where I was at a Tory party conference staying in a B&B, and I kept waking up at 2 o'clock in the morning sweating like a pig. And I hadn't, shall we say, been doing any activity to provoke me sweating like a pig. And it turned out there were rubber sheets on the bed, because normally pensioners stayed there. And I thought, I am never coming here again. And I never have. And on that note, Roger Gale, Anna Soubry, Julia Langdon and David Starkey, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Cross Question. Don't forget the Cross Question podcast if you missed any of it, and you can also watch it again on the LBC YouTube channel. Coming up in a moment, we're going to be talking about sentencing for drink driving. Want to hear your experiences. Maybe you are a convicted drunk driver and you think, well, actually, I was let off. I should have been treated more harshly. Or do you agree with what David Starkey was saying, that each individual case is different and that the courts need to understand that? It's 9:02.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From